Is it fair to say that you're broadly in the space of the buzzword that is GTM engineering?
From targeting to revenue conversion, that entire cycle is owned by the GTM engineers. The expectation out of companies is that they have to do more with less.
How do you think a GTM engineer differs from a growth marketer?
Primarily focused on outbound, list building to research to copywriting to setting up the sequencing of all emails, LinkedIn messages. People are still looking at databases like Apollo, exporting that as a CSV, uploading that into their HubSpot. All of this is so siloed and distributed that the entire bandwidth of a team is spent in basically managing all of these broken processes. For a row, it is able to do it for $0.00027.
So 0.2 cents for doing it for 10,000 rows. Oh my God. Kushagra, welcome. For the audience, do you mind talking a little bit about what exactly Revenue Genie is and what you guys do?
Sure. So we are a GTM automation agency. What we do is we automate sales use cases, marketing use cases, RevOps use cases, primarily focused on outbound. So end to end, from list building to research to copywriting to setting up the sequencing of all emails, LinkedIn messages. Just using what is at the base of it is this new age tools that allow you to do things differently. And that's why a lot of things now are possible to get to automate in the entire space of GTM teams. So that's where we are deciding.
Got it. So is it fair to say that you're broadly in the space of the buzzword that is GTM engineering?
Yeah, absolutely. Although I would like to say that GTM engineering as a term itself is still taking shape. So very early in terms of what that role encompasses, but definitely we are. You can think of us as your extended GTM engineering team. Wherever you're trying to drive efficiency in terms of sales, marketing, or RevOps use cases, that's where we step in. We map out the different new age tools that can actually make a difference and just automate the entire process.
Got it. Got it. Cool. Thanks a lot for explaining. What do you think has changed in the startup and specifically the B2B SaaS landscape that makes BTM engineering necessary?
Yeah, I think there are two primary things, right? I think the first one is just the changing landscape in the market. So since 23, the expectation out of companies is that they have to do more with less. And that is clear by just like one of the KPIs that you would see, right? Like one of the metric that has gained importance is ARR per full-time employee. So how much are you making uh, per full-time employee that you have? That has become important. That itself shows the fact that companies are now under pressure to do more with less, more than ever, right? So that is one key indicator in terms of the market landscape changing by itself. And the second thing that is a key change is what you can do with the new age tech, right? So tools like Clay or any large language model, how you can leverage that in your workflows to derive more value. That in itself has made it possible to do more with less. So this changing pressure in market uh, for people to drive more efficiency in companies, as well as now the ability to do that. Both of these things have changed, because of which GTM engineering is emerging as a function, I would say.
Got it. Got it. Yeah, I feel like if I were to step back a little, from me hypothesizing on things, I feel like there were two significant events that just led to companies focusing on ARR per employee or revenue per employee. One was post ZERP, the interest rates actually going up, and then all of a sudden, companies not really being able to raise money as quickly, SaaS valuations, so on and so forth, dropped. So that was one key thing that ended up happening post COVID, really. The second big thing that ended up happening was Elon Musk acquiring Twitter, right? And from having God knows how many employees to cutting it down to less than 10% of the overall number of employees. And the site is still running, it's still growing, all of those kinds of things. You can criticize how it's being managed, all of those things all you want, but he was able to really show that, hey, you really don't need as many people to run a company like Twitter. So I'm sure all the boards across different companies were like, yes, do we really need as many people as well? Right. So I'm sure that was one of the things that led to this.
100%. I still remember people saying that Twitter is going to go down now with this entire exercise of cutting down on the team. But yeah, like you said, it's still there, still running.
Yeah, yeah. Cool. Let's jump back into GTM engineering. How do you think a GTM engineer differs from, say, a growth marketer or a growth engineer?
So I would still like to think of GTM engineering in terms of primarily focused on outbound, right? There are a couple of reasons for that. The reason primarily for that is things in terms of what is possible in outbound are fleshed out. And since this role has started primarily in that space, a lot more clarity exists there. So, taking that example, I would almost say a GTM engineer, how they're different from a growth marketer or a growth engineer, is just in terms of ownership primarily, right? GTM engineers have much more say in terms of the end to end workflow. What I mean by that is right from identifying which ICP to reach out to, what is the right target person to reach out to, what is the right information to get from them, how to design this entire, let's say, a campaign, which encompasses writing copy, doing the research, setting up a sequence in different channels, and to taking a call with the customer to converting that into revenue, right? So from targeting to revenue conversion, that entire cycle is owned by the GTM engineer by themselves. Traditionally, things that would have been done by multiple people across functions, right? Say in a B2B SaaS company, you would have LDRs, SDRs, AE, somebody in RevOps, MarkOps, taking care of multiple of these things. But now GTM engineers are owning the entirety of that workflow, right? It is possible for them to do that. Whereas as opposed to a growth marketer or a growth engineer, the things that they focus on are still very defined. A growth marketer might be running certain experiments with defined metrics, right? Like let's say the metric is to increase traffic, but the level of ownership, I would say traditionally is lesser. And with growth engineer, I would say their focus is more on just doing product experiments or much more product focused, whereas GTM engineer is not that product focused. They are much more, they actually have a overlap in terms of multiple teams, but primarily where it has been fleshed out a lot is still the outbound part of it, and the sales function is where they're playing a very significant role. There are supplementary things that they're doing in marketing and RevOps, but in outbound or in sales, you can say that they are able to own the entirety of it.
Got it. Makes sense as well. I've noticed as well. Oftentimes, there's a sales team that really ends up scaling up a lot in terms of SDRs, LDRs, so on and so forth. So that's probably where you can end up driving the most amount of efficiency as well. Makes sense. Um, what do you think are the core skill sets someone should really have if they wanted to step into the GTM engineering role?
Yeah, that's a good question. I would say the three primary ones that stand out to me are one, just being able to learn these new things that are possible, right? Because there is no material per se out there that tells you this is how you have to use it. It's still a skill set that is being developed. So just innate curiosity and just like having that mindset to learn newer things and executing upon them, right? That I would say is a starting point. And the other things that are fairly important is some amount of technical know-how. That does not necessarily mean that you need to know how to code, right? But a lot of times, what you're doing as a GTM engineer is interacting with multiple data sources, right? And the only way you can do that is, let's say, using some API to connect one tool with another. So that amount of understanding, which now is fairly easier to get also using ChatGPT, uh, or any LLM for that matter, is one of the other things that is fairly important. The third one I would say is systems thinking, right? Because what you're building as a GTM engineer are systems that once you have built them, just keep on running by themselves and drive results. So those are the three primary skill set I would say. Again, basically growth mindset, the ability, the technical know-how of how to use some of these data sources and stitch them together, and systems thinking in terms of building something that keeps on executing by itself and delivers results. Those would be the three primary ones for me.
Got it. Thanks for explaining that, Katie. Very articulate there. Let's talk about tooling. There are so many different AI-driven tools out there like Clay, Apollo, SalesLoft. Where should a GTM engineer really start? What's the must-have tech stack for them?
Yeah, I would say, so for me, the bifurcation, I'm going to talk about the outbound use case specifically, and then I'm going to talk about like a few other things that are now possible in terms of the tools that you should pay focus to at the moment. So in terms of outbound, right, the primary things, you can look at the entire thing into four buckets. So list building, research, copywriting, and sequencing, right? Let's say those are the four buckets. In list building, you're essentially looking at where to find the right kind of companies and people, right? Apollo is still a place that you should be aware of because they have such a large data set. Or you can use something like Sales Navigator. All of these are traditional tools, right? You will already be using something like Apollo or Sales Navigator. For research, now what is possible is you can tap into some of these new data sources that was not possible. So you can look at somebody's website using a large language model. Now, how do you do that? For you to analyze the data on your prospect's website, now you need like a new age tool like Clay. So Clay is essentially like a base layer that you need, uh, either Clay or something like Cargo, but you do need like a base layer of workflow automation. And then you can use different data sources to connect within Clay. So for list building, you can have Apollo Sales Navigator. For research, you can use a large language model to pass through websites, or you can get somebody's LinkedIn post to research them further. You can see what they've posted about. For copywriting, there is a specific tool which only does copywriting called Twain, or you can use Anthropic for copywriting within Clay. And for sequencing, the two or three primary ones for email that everybody uses at the moment is performing great is Instantly or Smartlead for email. And for LinkedIn, people use HeyReach primarily. Or if you want to use something that does both LinkedIn and email, La Growth Machine and Lemlist are the choices, right? So this is spread across four different buckets, but the base layer of tying everything together is still Clay
Got it.
or something like Clay. Yeah.
So many different tools. I've actually added links to all of these in the show notes, guys. So please feel free to look at it then. Thank you, Katie, for actually sharing that entire list. You spoke a bunch about Clay. Could you give us a quick overview of what it does, why it's so powerful? And I know you have a demo for us as well. So excited to dive into that after that.
Absolutely right. So I quite like their positioning, how they frame their own position. I quite like that. So I'm just going to borrow that. Uh, the idea for us to understand why Clay is so great, right? A parallel that can be drawn is in terms of writing code. So earlier, before we had integrated development environment like VS Code, right? People used to write code in one place, test code in another place, or debug code in another place. But IDE, what it allowed was bringing all of this together into one place and not have like distributed siloed processes, right? But something like that never existed for GTM teams. You people traditionally, or even still, are still looking at companies and people in databases like Apollo, exporting that as a CSV, uploading that into their HubSpot or another CRM, building a sequence of emails there using templating and still sending out through their primary domains. All of this is so siloed and distributed that the entire bandwidth of a team, a significant portion of the bandwidth of the team is spent in basically managing all of these broken processes. So, what was IDE for engineers is Clay for GTM folks because now you can connect all of these data sources in different steps of the workflow into one place, stitch everything together, and then just run things from Clay itself.
Interesting. So I often think about what's the narrative shift that's happened in the world that creates space for a new company to come in. And in the case of Clay, it almost feels like, hey, there are so many different tools out there and they don't talk to each other well enough. There needs to be the centralized place where, which almost acts like an interface for different tools to interact with each other, for you to actually end up manipulating data and add other layers of intelligence on top of it. So super duper interesting. Thanks for that. That's actually a really good analogy that he gave there.
I would also like to add one more thing to that, right? Uh, there are so many things that came up and it is difficult to manage them. That's why something like Clay became even more important. That is 100% true. And the other reason you would see they still have their roots, like I keep saying, in outbound, right? For a fair bit of time, you would see the landing page also talked about personalization. I don't know whether it talks about it right now or not, but personalization of email, right? That again is like something that was shifting uh, and has been shifting, right? Traditionally, people would send emails with the same copy to everybody, but that email as a channel in itself is becoming saturated, right? How many times do we open up an email and look at it and then without even reading it, we put that into spam or archive it or delete it? Right? So the thing is, what worked in terms of email as a channel has also drastically changed. So you need to now, not only there are so many tools to use, but you need to use them to get results out of a channel like email.
Hmm. Got it. Got it. Makes sense. Awesome. Let's see in action. What are you going to
Yeah,
be demoing for us today?
absolutely. Rohit. Let me start presenting my screen. Yeah, so there are two flows. Let's see if you're able to get through both of them. But the first one that I'm going to talk about is a campaign setup that is focused towards targeting event audience. People are who are going to attend a specific event, right? Just before we dive into it, some context into this. We actually did run the setup for one of the events last year called SaaSter. SaaSter is fairly big, and we had a client who was going to attend SaaSter. And the idea was that oftentimes when you attend an event, a lot of time is just wasted in terms of not being able to meet the right kind of people, right? You have to go around the room and talk to, let's say, 100 people to actually find 5 people who are relevant to you. So that time is just, you're not able to maximize on that. And it is a trip to the US. You have invested a lot of your resources into that. Team has planned that event, and you're not able to capitalize on that, right? So SaaSter was such event, and we ran this setup. And the result that we got was we reached out to 100 folks, and I think we were able to meet with 20 over there. So 20% response rate, right? Positive response rate is what we had for the SaaSter campaign. Today, I'm going to demo the setup for an upcoming event which is called Prosper Show. For the folks who do not know about Prosper Show, it is an event that happens in the US for vendors who sell on marketplaces like Amazon. Right? It's fairly big and it's about to happen in March. So just to make it more relevant to right now, I have used the setup for Prosper Show, but we had run this in the past for SaaSter. Does that sound good, Rohit?
Yeah, that sounds great.
Yeah, so this is a quick visual of the workflow that you're going to see. The first thing is what we are going to do in this workflow is we are going to target LinkedIn posts, right? What we want to do is we want to find out who are the people who are talking about Prosper Show on LinkedIn because they are showing some level of intent that they are going to attend Prosper and we should be able to reach out to them and plan a meeting with them, right? So high intent uh, leads who are showing interest in going to Prosper Show on LinkedIn. That's what we're going to find through this data source. This data source is called Rapid API. Once we have done that, what we are going to do is we are going to extract the details about the author. Who is this person? What is the job title? Where do they work at? What does that company do? How many employees does that company have? So that's what we are going to focus on. Then we have a filtering mechanism of saying whether this person is a ICP fit or not. What we are relying on over there is revenue and website traffic. What makes somebody a fit into your ICP differs. But for our use case, the two primary data points that we are going to look at is the company's revenue and the website traffic, because that is what is relevant to us in this case. Then the last thing is we'll generate a personalized message using Anthropic, which is Claude. And finally, we are going to set up a campaign in HeyReach to send messages over LinkedIn. So that's a quick overview of the workflow itself. Now to dive into the setup, which is present inside Create. This is what it looks like. If this is your first time seeing Clay, this is very similar to a spreadsheet view, right? In Clay, you have something called tables. So each table has a dedicated function, is how I look at it, right? You can build tables with dedicated functions. In this case, the first table that you're seeing, the only job that table does is to get posts which talk about Prosper Show, which is what we want to do. So the first table that you see only gets posts from LinkedIn which talk about Prosper Show. How are we doing that? We're doing that using a third-party API, like I mentioned, called Rapid API. What I have over here is a column. So very similar to, again, spreadsheets, there is a concept called columns. In this case, this is a API column. So I'm connecting with a third-party API called Rapid API to get these posts, right? What I'm doing is I'm using a post method to hit this endpoint with this request. My request essentially is tell me all the posts which talk about Prosper Show as a hashtag. And if I click on this button, I will end up getting all of those posts from LinkedIn.
Is this from beginning of time? How do you make sure it's, hey, this 2025?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'm using sort by, so I'm sorting by the most relevant ones, and it should ideally show up with the in a chronological order, right? That's what that does. So it's in the order of posting. So the most recent ones will show up at the top.
Yeah. So RV underscore cron is reverse chronological. Is that what it is? Like,
That's a good question. I'm also not 100% sure. I would have to look at the API documentation, but my assumption
got it.
would be it is relevant and basically most recent. Most relevant
Got it.
and most recent.
Hey guys, to keep this video to under 30 minutes, we've gone ahead and moved the entire Clay demo to a separate video. You can grab a link to it from the show notes below. And with that said, let's jump back in. Cool, Katie. Thank you so much for walking me through this. This was really, really awesome. Like I said, my mind's just racing about the possibilities that are there. I also wonder about the world where everyone gets so familiar with Clay and there's just super personalized messages going in and out. I almost feel like the channel is going to get inundated. But now is really when you need to capitalize on things, I guess, right? Because it's still
Yeah.
new. So people who really jump on this and adopt these things right now, they probably are going to have a leg up on everyone else, right? So makes
100%.
makes a lot of sense. Yeah. So what do you think are the limitations of Clay here? Because this seems freaking powerful, but I'm wondering what you think are the limitations.
Yeah, that's a good question. There are a few limitations, or rather, I would say things that I would like to see improve in Clay. One, there is like a steep learning curve, right? And for good reason. I mean, if you have just operated in a non technical background, I've only done traditional sales in the past, getting a hang of how to use Clay takes some time, right? So, that learning curve of how to get different data and how to use them and leverage them, that takes some time. And because Clay is primarily usage based, right? So you're paying for what you're using, and that credit system is sometimes costly. So if you may end up making mistakes because you do not know how to operate it, those are really costly mistakes, right? I would say those are two primary limitations in my mind as to how things can be better. And the other thing that I feel like the database can do with some improvement. So Clay also has a native database of how you can find people. Right now, there is a lot of reliance on Apollo and other sources like Sales Navigator. You can pull a list from your Sales Navigator into Clay as well. But the point is that I think one of the intentions of building the native database into Clay is people will have an easier starting point. But I often run into issues with the natives of Clay search in terms of what kind of people it is finding, what it is targeting. So those kind of limitations do exist. And yeah, I would like to see improvements in them.
Got it, got it, got it. Cool. Awesome. Thanks a lot for walking me through that, Katie. For a founder looking to set up a GTM engineering function, because what you showed me, if you have a technical background, that is going to be a huge advantage. So for a founder looking to set up a GTM engineering function, where should they really start?
In terms of which use cases they should go after or how should they
No,
get
how do they
started?
even go about doing it? How do they even find the people to end up running this? What's the advice you'd actually give them to being like, someone comes to you, Katie, and it's just like, hey, I really want to grow my business, but I just don't want to end up hiring more people. That's just going to lead to a lot more management overhead. Uh, I don't really have the funds to actually end up hiring all these additional people. Someone comes to you and says that. What advice would you actually end up giving them?
Yeah, I would say at the moment, if you just look at pure job posts that are happening for the GTM engineering role, right? It has grown significantly in the past couple of months, and it only started as a thing in 2024, right? So very early days in terms of people actually hiring GTM engineers internally. Right now, what is happening at the moment is still because there is a steep learning curve, and people who have benefited the most from it have been agency owners, right? So Clay agencies have become a thing, and people who are figuring out these workflows are actually owners of agencies who are acting as an extended arm to these companies. And that's where the talent is at the moment. People who know this and have the skill are actually agency operators, but that is changing really fast. And now you're seeing like people are able to find sometimes agency owners who are becoming full-time employees. I, for a fact, know a couple of people in my own circle who had their own agency, but have now shifted to like a full-time role as GTM engineers.
Got it. Got it. Yeah, no, makes a lot of sense. I totally see the market opening up over here. Last question, Katie. Where
But
can
just
people
to Yeah,
go ahead?
sorry, just to add one more thing to that, right? Maybe if you're looking for how to get somebody who can get a grasp of this entire situation internally, maybe you have an employee who you would like to make sure is enabled for this particular skill set, right? Uh, an example of Clay, maybe like worth noting over here, all of their GTM engineering team, they were the first ones to have a GTM engineering team, had this concept and made like just created this category, or at least were primary drivers of this category, right? And how they went about it is like they ended up finding people who were really passionate about the product and came from a product or engineering background, right? So had technical skill set, maybe not a lot of sales background, but definitely a lot of technical know-how and also some amount of business acumen. Maybe it worked out really good for them because they were using their own tool, which is Clay, and it does not get translated in all cases, but that is something which might be helpful to keep in mind. So people who have business acumen and technical know-how are the right kind of people to hire for this internal role or promote for this internal role.
Got it. Thanks for sharing, Katie. Makes total sense to me. Last question to you, Katie. Where can people learn more about you and Revenue Genie?
Yeah, I and Vikrant, my partner in Revenue Genie, both are quite active on LinkedIn. And the other place that you can look at is revenuegenie.in, which is our website. So LinkedIn and website is the right way to find this.
Awesome. Cool. I've added those links in the show notes, folks. So yeah, you guys can find them there. Thanks a lot, Katie. This is absolutely fantastic. I learned a ton, and hopefully the audience that watched this entire video as well learned a ton over here. I really feel like investing in these kinds of tools is really going to give you a leg up in how you run and operate your business. So thank you for sharing this.
Awesome. Was great to be here, Raj.